If you could join me in welcoming Professor Robert Manne.
Thanks, Peter. To your surprise, I'll be giving a negative view. The Liberal Party had once gained its identity from opposition to Labor socialism. Yet from the time of the Hawke Prime Ministership, Labor ceased to be a socialist party in any meaningful sense. The Liberal Party also once gained its identity by claiming that its opponents represented only a section of the people, the trade unionists and the working class, while it governed for the nation on behalf of all. Yet under Hawke, this claim also lost plausibility. If the Liberal Party could not derive its identity as the anti-socialist and anti-sectional party, from where could its distinctive identity derive? John Howard sought to provide an answer to this question by making the Liberal Party, in my view for the first time in its history, an explicitly conservative party. Howard's period of leadership is best understood, I think, as the attempted neoliberal, neoconservative, quite different, reconstruction of the Liberal Party tradition. During the 1980s, John Howard was critical to the process that eventually made the predominant conservative idea of that decade, Hayekian neoliberalism, the unquestioned orthodoxy within the Liberal Party. During the 1990s, it was John Howard who ensured that the coalition became committed, in addition to another contemporary strand of political thought, American neoconservatism. Before September 11, John Howard was responsible for injecting into the centre of Australian political culture the dominant domestic dimension of neoconservative thought, the one which, under the slogan of political correctness, attacked the left-wing values of the elites while celebrating the virtues and the common sense of ordinary people. After September 11, John Howard embraced the dominant foreign policy dimension of neoconservative thought, the one that proved to be the most consequential for the history of the contemporary world, the neo-imperialist doctrine which sought to make US global hegemony permanent and unassailable, and which, in addition, advocated pro-American democratic and capitalist regime change under certain circumstances through the use of overwhelming force, armed force. Because of their belief in the pragmatism of their leaders, Australian political commentators systematically underestimate the significance of ideas. I believe they are mistaken. So it turns out does John Howard. Soon after he left office, John Howard argued, and I quote, "I know that it will be hard for some to believe that ideas can be so important. Massive and seemingly solid institutions of any society, the economic institutions, the political institutions, the religious institutions, are always at the mercy of ideas in the heads of the people who populate these institutions." I apologise for the bad expression, but the idea is clear. John Howard was not only a conservative Prime Minister, he was also an unusually ideologically driven one, in my view, for Australia. Between the mid-1960s and the mid-1990s, Australian governments were committed to a fundamental transformation of Australian political culture in the spheres of ethnicity and race. As leader of the opposition during the 1980s and again in the mid-1990s, John Howard proved to be the first significant Australian politician who resisted this racial, ethnic, cultural transformation of Australia. Howard's deepest hope was to end what he often called our endless symposium on national identity, and to make Australians feel relaxed and comfortable about their past. Howard's resistance to the ethnic, racial transformation of Australia was partly rooted in local forces, the emergence of the new right, but it was also rooted in the indirect influence upon his way of thinking of American neoconservatism, which taught him that ideas about the transformation of Australia, racial and ethnic, were in essence the product of alienated, self-hating, anti-Western, post-60s elites. Such people, the neoconservatives, taught Howard, behaved like Orwellian thought police. They were attempting to subvert the common sense of ordinary people by imposing upon them a new orthodox progressivist catechism called in shorthand political correctness. From one point of view, the years between 1996 and 2001 are best understood as the Howard government's drawing of the lessons of the rise of Pauline Hanson. Throughout these years, the Prime Minister watched with interest the rise of an anti-multiculturalist, anti-Asian and anti-Aboriginal populist party, One Nation, which, as we all know, at the height of its popularity in the Queensland state election, was able to garner almost 1/4 of the vote, mainly, I think, of the losers in the era of globalisation. Between 1996 and 2001, the Howard government thus was searching for a non-economic way in which it could exploit the contradiction revealed by the popularity of the One Nation party and explained for him and for many, some in this room, by neoconservative thought. The clash between the values and interests of the left-leaning elites, the values and interests of the mainstream. In August 2001, the government finally discovered the mainstream ethnic racial cause it needed, patriotic border protection. The campaign to repel Muslim asylum seekers from Saddam Hussein and the Taliban by military force killed One Nation as a serious party, as the results of the November 2001 election revealed, by, in one blow, satisfying the appetite on which One Nation fed. As a consequence of Tampa, even more importantly, Labor was badly destabilised. The war on asylum seekers exposed the tension between two parts of its support base, the affluent progressivist professionals and the traditionalist working class battlers. Now, in the United States, the force of populist conservatism, associated since Reagan with the Republican Party, focused most importantly on questions concerning religion or morality, like gay marriage or abortion or stem cell research. In Australia, because of our different history, it focused on questions concerning ethnicity and race, like Aboriginal rights or multiculturalism or asylum seekers. The Hanson phenomenon had revealed the existence of a powerful current of this kind of populist conservatism in the Australian people. John Howard had shown at the time of Tampa how that force could be harnessed by a party and a government which possessed sufficient ruthlessness and will. Populist conservatism, in my view, reshaped both the Liberal Party and to some extent the Australian political culture, and in my view entirely for the bad. And it's probably why I became so exercised by what John Howard was doing, and broke with former friends on that. Before September 11, the focus of John Howard's conservative remaking of the Liberal Party focused overwhelmingly on domestic questions. He was, by September 11, as we know, moved and shaken, particularly because he was there in Washington. From this moment until the conclusion of his prime ministership, John Howard, on behalf of Australia, presented the United States with a virtual blank cheque, offering not merely diplomatic, but also military support in whatever action it might take in what quickly came to be known as the War on Terror. On questions as disparate as Afghanistan, Iraq, Israel, United Nations, the Millennium Project, the Kyoto Protocol, there was no government in the world on which the United States could more reliably depend than they could on Australia. Wherever America would go, so would we. During the 1990s, the neoconservative movement in the United States concentrated its energies on the creation of a new post-Cold War foreign and military policy. The neoconservatives argued for a very heavy increase in US military spending so as to make its global dominance completely and permanently unassailable. They argued for an aggressive and muscular neo-Reaganite foreign policy of the kind it claimed had defeated the Soviet Union. They argued for the active encouragement of pro-American democratic and capitalist regime change. In particular, they argued for a strategy to ensure the downfall of Saddam Hussein's regime in Iraq, which they argued was a key source of Middle Eastern terrorism. After the shock of September 11, the neocons were the only group inside the Bush administration with a clear plan about what was needed to be done. On a theoretical level, the neoconservatives inside the Bush administration developed a new and revolutionary, and I think melancholy, strategic doctrine, which called for the mounting of preemptive strikes. As, however, the assumption of the doctrine was the utter unpredictability of the behaviour of rogue state dictators, what was in reality being advocated were not preemptive strikes, but preventive wars, something unknown to any civilised international legal thinking, at least since the Second World War. Within days of September 11, they were arguing that the war against al-Qaeda and the Taliban in Afghanistan would be followed, or should be followed, by the invasion of Iraq. Because on September 11, the Howard government had offered the Bush administration unconditional support in its war on terror, it implicitly embraced in its entirety the new US strategic doctrine, which overthrew the entire basis of post-Second World War international law. And because the Howard government had offered the United States a blank cheque for whatever actions it decided to take during the war on terror, there was not one argument mounted by the United States and Britain during the preparation for the invasion of Iraq, which Australia did not instantly, uncritically and automatically endorse. The justification for this unlawful invasion was, as we all know, completely false. Saddam Hussein possessed no weapons of mass destruction. Even worse, the invasion of Iraq led not to the flowering of democracy, but to a 5-year period of catastrophe, in which tens, or more likely hundreds of thousands of innocent Iraqis lost their lives, in which relations between the two major Islamic groups, the Shia and the Sunni, became so poisonous that civil war threatened. The Iraq invasion, in my view, was even more disastrous than the Vietnam War. If the reputation of the Liberal Party is to be revived in the field of foreign affairs, its leaders must now confront honestly the mistakes made and damage done by the Howard government's uncritical embrace of US policy in the war on terror and its enthusiastic participation in the invasion and occupation of Iraq. Now, in his superb book, High and Dry, Guy Pearce, the former Liberal Party staffer to the Minister for the Environment in the Howard government, Senator Robert Hill, Guy Pearce argues thus, I quote, "John Howard's climate change policy ought to be regarded as one of this country's great political scandals," end quote. This is also my view. How is the scandalous behaviour of the Howard government with regard to the most vital issue of the era, global warming, to be explained? There are many reasons. As the orthodox economist Sir Nicholas Stern pointed out in his report for the Blair government, global warming represents the greatest example of market failure in the history of humankind. John Howard is a member of that class of politicians that was converted to Hayekian neoliberalism during the 1980s. Because neoliberalism represents, in essence, mistrust of government action and faith in the invisible hand of the market, its supporters are ideologically pre-programmed to doubt the existence of market failure. In addition, because he was a convert to American neoconservatism, Howard was also ideologically pre-programmed to interpret all expressions of doubt about the beneficence of the workings of the free market as the deep anti-capitalist prejudice of politically correct elites. Not all the reasons for the global warming policies of the Howard government are, of course, ideological in character. Howard was determined that Australia's global warming policy should be coordinated with the global warming policy of our great and powerful friend. In addition, it was clear that Howard's narrowly economic interpretation of Australia's national interest determined his unwillingness to curb Australia's carbon emissions or to imperil Australia's vital export trade in fossil fuels, especially coal. The Howard government was also always extremely sensitive to the mining interests: coal, aluminium, iron, steel, oil. Representatives of the energy business lobby, as Guy Pearce shows, the so-called Australian Industry Greenhouse Network, were given almost unprecedented access to the Cabinet and public decision-making process. In explaining the Howard government's unwillingness to rise to the challenge of global warming, there are not too few lines of explanation, but if anything, too many. Yet one thing at least seems to me clear. Any restoration of the good name of the Liberal Party requires a fearless reckoning with the abject global warming failure of the Howard government. I hope, in this very brief talk, not to be misunderstood. I'm not claiming that the rise of populist conservatism or the failure of the Howard government's Iraq policy or its unwillingness to rise to the challenge of global warming were responsible for its defeat in November last year. What I have, however, attempted to show in three fundamental public policy areas is the damage that has been inflicted on Australian political culture and on Australia's international reputation by John Howard's neoliberal, neoconservative reconstruction of the non-Labor tradition, a tradition passing from Alfred Deakin to Malcolm Fraser via Sir Robert Menzies. During his period as Prime Minister, the Parliamentary Liberal Party, including the Honourable Tony Abbott, offered John Howard unwavering and uncritical support. As his legacy becomes discredited by the facts, not by the arguments of elites, so will the reputation of those who followed him so loyally be discredited. In my view, only honest criticism of the Howard years will eventually restore the reputation of the Federal Liberal Party and lead it out of its present values void.